Perfect. So everyone, thank you for joining us. You come through to the right place. This is our webinar on Use These Better, and we are joined by Teagan and Chris from KPMG. They're going to be talking us through and giving us kind of an insight from an end user's perspective and a client's perspective. So what I'm going to do, we've got more people. Thank you for joining in. I'll use these better. Now, I know a lot of people have received invites via LinkedIn and via email. So we're going to pop in the chat box down the bottom. It's a little speech bubble to the right-hand side of your screen. There's going to be a link to our Use These Better, our online community that we use on LinkedIn. So we're trying to build up, thank you, Dave. So we're trying to build up a community online to share information, to collaborate and work together and ask kind of questions and build a bit of a community idea, especially off the back of the last couple of years that we've all had. So Chris, Teagan, I'm going to pass over to you. Are you all right to give us a bit of an introduction of who you are and where do you come from and what you're up to?
Happy to. Thanks very much, Raquel. Hi, everyone. And thanks for joining. Great to see so many people on here and a couple of familiar names I can see in the list. So great to have everyone here. Yeah, I'm Chris Dunbar. I'm a director within KPMG Infrastructure Advisory Group, focusing on infrastructure development projects for largely public sector clients, certainly for majority public sector projects in the health, regeneration, higher education, and life sciences sectors primarily. Although we also do a fair bit across with colleagues in other sectors in transport, power and utilities, and so on. So quite a varied range of projects. I suppose the common thread is they all tend to be quite complex development partnerships. So most of the bids that we'll talk about today are either competitive dialogue or competitive procedure with negotiation type procurements where our clients are really concerned with finding a partner that they can work with for the long term. So some of our comments will reflect that. Previous life before joining KPMG, I've been here for about 7 years now, was on the bid side and on the project development side for infrastructure investors of various types. So people like John Lang, Amy, a little bit of time with Gatwick Airport on their development programs. So quite a varied range of bidding experience from that side of the table. And now, of course, on the other side of the table, alongside clients who are procuring partners. And go back a long way with Dave. So hence the reason for getting involved today. Worked for many years with Dave on bids large and small, usually large, and always found it great working with Hobs. So great to be here.
Oh, what an intro, Chris, and a little plug for us.
Teagan.
Hi, everyone. Teagan Hallgarth. So work within the same team as Chris, so I won't sort of go over existing ground as to sort of what the team that I'm involved in, I work in. I'm an engineer by background, so I spent most of my career in sort of delivery of major infrastructure projects. Firstly in Australia, if you can tell by the accent, Australia and New Zealand, and have been working over in the UK for the past sort of 2.5 years. At the moment, my focus is really on sort of helping clients, largely, as Chris said, in sort of partnerships, but really involving sort of maximising value from land, public sector land, usually in partnership with a private sector partner. But that can be sort of spanning sort of clients from local central government, NHS clients, higher education sector clients, so a wide range of clients, but usually with that sort of common thread, either helping them structure the deals in commercial and funding structure, but then ultimately also sort of supporting them through the procurement process to help them find a partner that sort of meets their objectives. That's me.
Wow, thank you. Well, you guys come with a hell of a lot of experience. And Chris kind of summed it up when he said that he's worked on small bids, massive bids, and the two of you have worked on really iconic bids as well. And I know especially during COVID, and I think probably the main question that we get asked a hell of a lot, being kind of a third party go-between guy with our clients, is what are the top priorities for clients at the moment? Are you seeing any trends currently?
Okay, so that's the sort of $64,000 question, I suppose. What are clients looking for? The biggest thing I think I've noted from our clients as we go through projects with them is that for all clients, even the largest and you would say most experienced in terms of delivering large scale procurements, every project of the type we deal with is very significant to them, and to some extent is a one-off. So they're always quite, they're always on quite unfamiliar territory. They're trying to do something big. They're trying to do something complicated. So the number one thing they're looking for from bidders is to get a sense that they have a credible partner that they can work with, a partner that understands what they're trying to achieve, a partner that is honest about limitations, opportunities, risks, and how they'll manage them, and manages to convey that in every interaction. So through the bid documentation, but not just the bid documentation, the way they conduct themselves through dialogue sessions and meetings, and the way their sort of marketing story, if you like, the sales pitch extends through into the way they deal with the commercials and the legal markup and how they present their financials. So really, I think the number one takeaway I've had in coming from sort of bid side to client side is the extent to which the client is sensitive to any kind of discord or mismatch or any kind of sense that things aren't completely joined up. And the bidders who are successful are the ones who are most convincingly able to show that they are joined up and that all parts of the organization get it, not just the people doing the glossy bit. So I think that's my big takeaway. Teagan, what do you think on that?
Yeah, I think that's interesting because it sort of goes to the second part, which is a trend. And I think more recently, I have seen sort of a shift away from these one-off procurements of I've got a development over here that I want done and I'm going to go and get someone to do it. It's shifted away a bit from that to, well, yes, I've got that development, but actually I think I've got another one that's coming down the track and maybe another one there as well. And actually maybe what I want is just someone to help me through a lot of that and bring that sort of private sector expertise and help me develop this, but develop the future sites as well. And I think that's why trust is becoming more and more important, because when you're looking for someone not only to do this deal, but to do the next one and the next one, really what you're then looking for is someone that you're working with over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And I'm sure we'll get onto it in a second or in a minute, but when it comes to sort of price and value for money, which we can't say aren't important, they're important. Of course they are. Every public sector client has to demonstrate value for money. But because of that longer term view, it's no longer just $1 on a page because it can't be, because they don't actually know what's going to go on that site. And it's not just about what's on that site, it's what's about on all the other sites. So it's interesting because it sort of starts to look at a much different way of bidding. It's different. So I think that's interesting. I think linked to that as well, it can't be underestimated. The actual delivery is important, and it is linked to trust, but they want to know that something is going to get delivered and deliver those broader benefits, because ultimately when any public sector client is bringing these schemes forward, there's always a broader reason for it. It's that placemaking, it's the ability to sort of unlock future development. And so when they're sort of looking at these things, I think fundamentally they're looking for someone that they can trust and that are credible, that they know that this thing's going to happen and that someone's not just sort of going to come forward and change their mind or land bank or whatever it might be, because that's ultimately what they want. Return's nice to have, value for money is nice to have, but it's the broader economic benefits and all those sorts of things that are top of their mind.
And it's you mentioned about relationship and trust. Like, I think with a lot of people, you've got to have a lot of trust, haven't you, in your, whatever it is, if it's a construction company, if it's an accountancy firm, if you're going to give them that work, and like you've just said, Teagan, that they're going to work with you for 5 years, 10 years, 15, there's a lot of trust, isn't there? Because there's a lot at stake if it goes wrong.
Yeah, and there's an interesting thing about, we're moving away from commoditized, procurements. We're moving away from we're seeing our clients move away from sort of standard specifications and off the shelf procurements to things that are really quite tailored. And because things are tailored, this isn't just a case of, in the old PFI days, for example, you put out a PFI and you've got 5 bidders down to 3 bidders down to 2 down to 1, who are all essentially delivering variations on the same thing. This is different. This is 5 bidders coming with 5 different ways of doing things, 5 different financing models, 5 different approaches, and clients have to pick their way with a single set, within the constraints of the public contracts regulations. They have and their evaluation criteria. They have to find their way through comparing those quite different offers from different people. So they really are, looking to see evidence of how what bidders are offering is meeting their requirements, strategic as well as financial. So it's an interesting process. And I think one final thing I'd say on what we see clients are looking for is that perhaps because of the kind of bids we work on, we don't see that phenomenon with evaluation teams all off in different corners, evaluating aspects in isolation. We do see teams coming together and talking through, elements of the evaluation in a collaborative way. So that makes that a consistency point all the more important.
Do you think COVID's played a part? Because obviously we've been in this kind of turbulent time over the last kind of 2 years. I mean, we're still kind of really in the throes of it. We don't know when it's going to stop. Do you think that's changed a lot of clients' perspective when it comes to bidding? Or do you think there's been a shift slightly? Because I think going back 5-6 years ago, the feedback that we always got, that the commercials guy and the financial guy would go straight to the back and go to the bottom of the thing and get the pounds and pence and say, oh, that's no good. Do you think that's changed because of the situation that we've all been in over the last 2 years? Not only economy-wise, but also, I guess, personally. And do you think that's played a part, or?
What do you think, Teagan?
I don't know. I haven't necessarily seen a change due to COVID. I think the sort of go to the back of the page and look at the number has changed more because of the shift towards a strategic partner, because you can't, what are you even looking at? What's the number? What are you even trying to find? Like, we're finding now, when it comes to a financial evaluation, and certainly when we're helping our clients sort of derive questions that you want to ask, as Chris said, you've got 5 different bidders who are proposing 5 completely different things. So you can't look at a single number. You've got to have a sort of multifaceted approach. If anything, the sort of financial questions are becoming more qualitative, because you are looking at sort of how do you compare these things and what's the value that you're bringing beyond just the number. What's the sort of broader value that you're giving? So I think less and less it's about sort of looking for a number, because I don't think a number exists, but I don't think that's driven by COVID. The only COVID related changes, I would say, and again, I think they probably predate it to an extent, is I think there is an increased focus on sort of capacity and sort of financial and economic strength of parties, and sort of really focusing on that for our clients. There is a sort of renewed focus, and I think people often see it as a bit of a ticker box. Yes, it's something we have to do to meet the regulations, but it is something that clients increasingly put a lot of focus in, especially during those initial phases, making sure they are comfortable that there is sort of sufficient capacity of that person to take forward. I think that's only been strengthened during COVID. It's something that predates it, of course, but it's definitely increased.
Yeah, that need for financial standing checks up front and early, particularly in the kind of stuff we do, is very critical. So we spend a lot of time with clients and with their other advisors determining what kind of, normally consortium bids we're dealing with, what kind of consortium bids are they looking for? What's the balance of expertise to financial strength? To what extent do our clients need financing to be nailed down and available at the outset versus, you know, accepting a process where you have more of a, you know, a development manager as a partner who then goes and finds financing with you. So there's a lot of work on that side of things done quite early, but then beyond that early stage, I think we're away from that turn to the back piece. Again, back to the consistency point, the worst thing that can happen if people turn to the back is that either, you know, the information doesn't stack up. You know, we still see, you know, basic errors from quite large organizations. You know, we see basic errors in you know, arithmetic or completion of the financial aspects of bids, you know, which ought to be an easy one to iron out. And then inconsistency between the commercials and what the quality submission says are key things that people, you know, hone in on and I guess take a bit of an adverse reaction to it if they see that happening.
And I think one of our clients actually put it perfectly the other day when we were sort of talking to them about evaluation sort of criteria, particularly in the financial sort of space. And if for this particular bid, we were looking at land value, because it's common for public sector entities to put their sort of land into these transactions, and that's their sort of financial contribution to the deal. So how much the land is valued becomes quite important to their overall sort of stake in the deal and etc. And we were sort of talking through, well, if someone offered you up a greater land value, is that something you want to place importance on? And is that something that would weight heavily in this evaluation? And I think she put it quite perfectly when she said, well, 50% of nothing is still nothing. So no. And I think that was right. It was, well, they can put whatever they want on a piece of paper, but ultimately I want to look at the bigger picture. I want to sort of see what's the added value, because that's all well and good. But if I'm not going to achieve these sort of other things, what good is it to me? And I think that reflects a lot of what our other clients are thinking as well, is sort of, well, that's all well and good, but yeah, I want to understand everything a bit more. I don't just care about that number.
Yeah, I think it's understanding. And it, again, the theme whenever we speak to any of our kind of leaders or key people within the bidding industry, communication always comes up front and centre, and it's repeated constantly whenever we do these webinars. And it's really, really nice to see that consistency throughout, that communicating not only with your team, your internal team, but also to that client, and ask them questions and give them the what if, what about, how about this happens. And Chris kind of stumbled into my next question, unknowingly.
Sounds about right. Yeah.
About the common errors that you guys come up against, where you must sit there sometimes and see something that comes up quite commonly. And I know Teagan does, because when we had a little chat a few weeks ago, Teagan was like, we see things and we're like, no, how have you done that? Like, what have you missed? So I know there's people on this call. What are they, guys? How can we prevent that from happening? And how can we earn the extra points in those areas that we're probably missing and not knowing that we're missing on a bid?
Shall I kick off with a couple?
I think you already said a few already, so you might.
Yeah, we've said a couple. So just to bring to life the sort of the seriousness of it, and I'm sure all of us on the call know this, but we advised on a large development partnership deal where in the end the difference in evaluation was 1 point, and that wasn't even 1%, because there were more than 100 points on offer. So it was a tiny difference, which ultimately resulted in the outcome. And the interesting thing was that the scoring, it wasn't as though they'd scored almost identically, apart from one scored slightly lower on one part. That the scoring was actually completely different. So places where one scored high, the other scored low. And that comes back to that commoditized, it's not a commoditized, it's not a cookie cutter market that we're in. We're in different bidders providing very different solutions to problems. And I'm sure a lot of the people on this call have that. They're bidding against people who've got either a different way of doing things, or a different ethos, or a different supply chain structure, different strengths and weaknesses. So the need to make every point count is really important. I'd say the biggest place we see people falling down is on basic arithmetic, basic compliance with the financial requirements. So, not doing quite what the client asked. some sort of mismatch that I've already referred to between the tone and the messaging and the language and the values in some parts of the submission, notably the quality submission, which normally gets a lot of love spent on it, and then the commercials and financials, which is where sometimes people's true colors show through. And then something about not recognizing and not reflecting enough what the client considers important. So most clients go to a lot of trouble to try and convey through their bid documents what's important to them. And sometimes we see people not quite play that back in the right way and not quite demonstrate they've understood that and that they've got the message. And then a final one, sorry for hogging it, Teagan, because I hope I've left you something. Well, I'll tell you what, why don't you do one? And if you do I say, then I'll come back with mine.
As long as you don't forget it. So, no, look, I think that's right. I think definitely the biggest one for me is tying the technical and the commercial together, because you'll read a technical and go, this sounds great. And then you look at the commercial and go, well, that makes no sense, because that's not at all what you sort of said, or there's just some slight differences. And I think it goes back to that trust and credibility point that there's probably a very good reason. Look, I've sat on bid side and I know things are shifting right up until the very last minute that you hit that submit button. And there's always going to be those little things that you're like, oh, whoops, I just forgot to change that in the other section. But when you're sitting then on the public sector side, you're looking at it and you sort of go, well, which one's right? And the fact that you have to ask the question then makes people go, oh, but like, ooh, it just like makes you cringe a bit and just makes you a bit sort of nervous. But I think the biggest one for me is like showing your homework. Because, and again, it goes back to this trust and credibility. I feel like we keep banging the same drum, but what a client loves to see is someone go, look, this is what we think we can do for your site. Here's the sort of commercials that sort of backs it up. They're both consistent, but even better than that, here's sort of why we've made every single assumption. Here's all the market analysis. Here's the sort of external report that we've got from this. Here's sort of the reason why we've done that, because we've looked here, or a previous project that we've done over here showed X, Y, Z, and that's sort of what we're bringing to this project and why we've made these assumptions. They're things that you've probably all thought of, and they're the reason why you've done what you've done, but don't sort of second guess or underestimate the lack of knowledge that's sitting on the public sector side to understand that. Because, yeah, the best bids we've ever seen have sort of said, here's all the reasons, and straight away a client just goes, well, like, I get it, and I understand why they're doing it, and actually I've got more faith that this is deliverable than perhaps someone who's going to come forward and maybe offer me a bit more money, I don't know, but like, I trust that that's deliverable because here's all the evidence backing it up, and like, happy days. So I think that's the biggest thing. It's just sort of showing your homework, showing you it, marking out sort of, especially I think going back to Chris's point as well, where there is differences, particularly around like funding structures or some of those more sort of detailed elements of how sort of companies might be structured, how they might fund things, or however it might be differently to what some of the competitors are. Just set that out and set out the reasons and why that should benefit the client. Because, yeah, when they see something that's a bit different, if they don't understand why, and obviously we try and help them understand why, but it's a lot easier if you set out why is it different and why does that add value to them. So, yeah, it's just like, these are sort of complicated things, but they're just the top of mind of me.
Yeah, and we do hear that, you know, we've all heard and we've all focused on as people responding to bids, you know, that what's in it for me point. How do you demonstrate to the client, you know, what's at stake for them, what the benefits are for them? That is really key. And, you know, all our clients, they don't mind if the contract's marked up. They don't mind if there are, you know, slightly different ways of doing things are proposed, so long as they can see what's in it for them, so long as they can see how it doesn't adversely affect their risk profile, how it maintains alignment of interest between, you know, the public and private sector partners. As long as they can see that articulated and spelt out, they're happy with it. I've seen bidders with tied, you know, construction-led bidders who have tied supply chain where, you know, the majority, if not all of the construction will be done by a related party of the bidder make a convincing argument about why that's a good idea. I've seen developer-led bids with no supply chain tied make a convincing argument as to why that's a good idea. And I've seen both do it badly. So I've seen a contractor developer who couldn't explain why it was a good idea to be a contractor developer, and vice versa. And you're not helping yourself if you're doing that. It's about showing, and it's about if there are inherent difficulties. For example, there's an inherent difficulty with opening your books up, or saying you're going to be transparent if you're tied to a contractor. But there are ways of doing it, and again, we've seen them done well. So it's about setting out how you acknowledge that there's a potential concern on the part of the client, and how you then spell out how you allay that concern, how you mitigate that risk. That goes down really well with people.
Yeah, I think it's that, like, don't try and sort of hide, like, nothing's going to be hidden. So, like, if you think that there's a potential question or there's something that is different about you, I think you might as well get on top of it, because other people are going to note it, not least all the client sort of advisors that are going to sort of say, well, this is what's different about this bidder. Yeah. And rather than leaving it up to them and the advisors to form a view as to whether that's a positive or a negative and set out all the different sort of reasons for that, put your point of view forward, because you're the best person to answer that question, not us. Sorry, I just saw the question. But yeah.
So I think the big thing to take away is transparency, isn't it? But playing devil's advocate, there's going to be people on this call that say, well, if we've got a word limit or we've got a page limit, how do we do that? From an end user's perspective and a client perspective, if we were to submit a bid and send it across, but let's say we were 2 pages out, or we were a PDF out, however we sent over our workings, is there a way around that you don't get discarded because you've gone over that? Is there some inside knowledge that you can share with us of how to get around that?
So I'm laughing because, of course, we're a bidder as well, so we advise and sit alongside clients on these great big infrastructure bids that take a couple of years to procure. And then we're on the receiving end of having to bid for work in about 5 days flat, with exactly as Belinda's just described, the sort of, the frustrating portal. So the best advice there is communicate. If you've got a little bit of non-compliance or a difficulty, flag it as early as possible. We don't have a deciding role in that. So although we sit alongside clients, it's going to come down to the client's own procurement team or the procurement lawyer who's going to make a call on that. But I can tell you one from bitter experience, which is flashing before my eyes now. So long time before KPMG, I was working for another company, and we were bidding for a public-private partnership, and I had just changed companies. And this was a lesson about company culture. I had just changed companies. In the previous company, the commercial director always used to drive the bid. This was when you had to physically deliver paper bids. He used to always drive the bid in his Jag and take it down, and it would go wherever. So I was on my first bid at this new company and looked at the commercial director and was going to ask her what time she was going to go and get her car. And she said, I don't do that. And so I found myself in a taxi heading to town, which will remain nameless, so I don't give it away, in a taxi going up the motorway to get this bid in by 12 o'clock. And it turns out, this is how I discovered black cabs are limited to 50 miles an hour. And so going up at 50 miles an hour towards this town up the M1, and realized we weren't going to get there, and actually called the procuring authority and said, we're not going to get there in time. Please, could you hold off on looking at the bids? And I think this was our legal advisor told us to do this. Please, could you hold off on opening the bids until we arrive, so that the process is kept intact and there can't be any concern about X or Y. And they accepted that, and ultimately our bid was accepted, despite being late. So I think it's back to, communicate, dialogue. Don't leave it to chance though. If there's a potential issue, shout, raise your hand, and allow them the opportunity to deal with it.
Yeah, I think too, there's nothing more annoying than a sort of very short page limit sometimes, when you're like, I could go on for days on this. I'd like to think that that has been thought through is all I can say. So I know when we're advising our clients that there is a reason why the page limit has been there, and it's been in consideration with what we think needs to be provided.
Yeah.
That being said, I think it's a case of you have to work with what you've been given. So if you've been given a very short page limit or very short sort of ability to provide commentary, I think all you can do is flag the fact that you've thought about this, flag the fact that further information is available if requested, sort of put the hooks in there to give people going, okay, yeah, I believe they've thought about it. And then they can always ask for more information if needed. I think that's the only thing you can do. Yeah.
We did do, as KPMG, we did a bid for CCS recently, one of the big framework bids about a year ago, and that had very tight word limits. And it did focus, our proposals team, it did focus their advice to those of us who are responding to the bid on, make sure you're absolutely hitting every point of the evaluation, so if you've got limited words, don't waste them on the fluffy stuff, and really get to maximizing, scoreable comments, I guess, and scoreable input.
Yeah, I think communication's key. I think people, it's got to be daunting, isn't it? If you're part of a busy bid team and everything's hit the fan and everything's up in the air and you're trying to get this bid sorted, I think communicating is so daunting to your client, isn't it? The client that you're bidding for. So I think communication probably is great, but maybe evaluate it, communicate with your team, and then communicate maybe in one email and say, we've got more information, it is available for you. So you're not bombarding the client, I guess.
And clients aren't, clients are under pressure and they're under resourced, to get these things out. And they can be quite flexible. If you say to them, we don't think we can cover, our 20-year development strategy in 700 words, that, they will take that. They will take that into account in certain kinds of bid. I know in others they won't, but yeah.
It's going to be worth the ask, isn't it?
Yeah, it's worth asking. Yeah.
And you both touched upon the change of language in the technical part of submissions and the commercial part. Is that, and forgive me because I'm not part of a bid team, but is that because different people are writing different parts of the bid, and then when you're piecing them together as a bid manager / writer, the language and the wording is different? And if so, how do you avoid that from our perspective?
Like it's what you've exactly said. I would say it's the fact that you've got hundreds of different people working on this. You've got probably your architects and your master planners feeding in, or whatever it is, your technical people feeding into the technical response. You've probably got some commercial advisors or whatnot feeding into the commercials, and all it takes is a sort of last minute change, or often it's probably on the commercial section that someone's trying to fine tune a few numbers and get comfortable with it, and then you've upped the rents, or you've gone, actually, I think maybe we can be a bit more aggressive on some of those rent assumptions, but then actually in the qualitative submission, it sort of says, well, actually, no, based on market evidence, we think you can only hit X. And it's just not sort of followed through. So I think it's just the fact of bidding almost, and there's not much you can do to fix it except for sort of be conscious of it and having a sort of good bid manager that sort of does that once over, understands where all the interdependencies are between the different sections, almost keeps a sort of list of them to make sure that there's a final sort of check through that there's not any sort of glaringly obvious errors.
Yeah, I think in clients' heads, they'd like to believe that the people who are writing the bid are the ones who'll turn up and deliver the work. Now, we all know it's rarely the case. It's not always the case. I mean, it is for us. We write our bids and we deliver our work, in the advisory stuff that we do. But in these large projects, we know there are bid teams and so on, and so does the client, I guess. But it's not letting the inconsistency isn't the problem in and of itself. It's if there's something given away within the inconsistency that makes part of it makes people disregard part of it. So if you say how, it's more likely that you're going to give away something of your true business strategy in your commercial markup than in your carefully crafted executive summary. So, check I guess the advice to bid managers and bid directors is check the tone of the commercials is coming across in a way that you'd want it to, as well as just don't have a blind spot and assume the commercial director will deal with it. Make sure that it fits the bid vision and the bid strategy as well, and the strategy of what you're trying to get across.
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it, when you've got different people writing different areas, and especially when we speak to, and I speak to a lot of SMEs that don't have the luxury of being able to keep control of the whole process. So they're relying on one team to deliver this and one team to deliver that, and getting them in the same voice tends to be really, really hard, doesn't it? Because without one of you, and I'm guessing proofreading, it's the age-old letting someone read an email for you, or letting someone read through the bid that's a third party. And I guess if they can understand it, I mean, is that still something that people do, or you would recommend people doing? I don't even know if that's a thing.
We've actually done it ourselves. So we've, as much as we sort of advise public sector clients quite a lot, we've been brought in quite a lot with our private sector partners to help them with sort of what we're talking about now, almost like refine some of that bid strategy, refine some of the language in bids, sort of refine some of that commercial and funding strategy, all linked to sort of how we understand how the public sector works. So I think it's valuable. It's who you get to do it is the question. But I think it certainly does happen because we've done it.
And in the same way as we're talking about the written page, and whether the written messaging, goes astray somewhere, perhaps because, there's a particular person who's holding on to the commercials tightly and doesn't want to, widen that out to the bid team. The same can happen in dialogue meetings and in post-tender meetings with the client, where you might be able to get the architect and the technical team on message, but you might not be able to control depending on how big or small an organization is, you might not be able to control your development director or your CFO. If your CFO comes to the bid presentation, they're going to say what they like. Thank you very much. And, we can't all deal with that. It's a big issue to deal with, but to the fullest extent possible, if they're aligned and on message as well, it's going to present a better, we could do a whole nother session, couldn't we, on the whole, the dialogue meeting and the post-tender presentation side of things.
Yeah, and you know what? You've probably given Dave a little idea from one of our new webinars. He's laughing and giving me a thumbs up outside. Because again, it's an area, but it's a domino effect, isn't it? If you don't get it right at the start of the process, you don't stand a cat in hell's chance of getting it right at the end and scoring that goal and winning the points. Yeah. So I guess the big thing is kind of reevaluate, but it's communication. It always seems to come back with bidding of communication, transparency, ask the question and don't be scared to ask the question and put yourself forward. Now, I have a sneaky suspicion that we're going to get some questions on this session. So I'm going to stop asking you questions and we're going to mix it up and we're going to open the Q&A. Now, I know we had a question from Belinda in here that's actually recommended a book. So if anyone wants to check it out, in the speech bubble at the bottom right hand side, Belinda's recommended something. So we're going to aim this question at Teagan.
Well, I think I answered it. Hopefully I answered it. Yes. I don't know, Belinda, did I answer your question? I was trying to read and answer at the same time.
You did indeed. Okay. Thank you so much, Teagan.
No, that's okay.
Perfect. Thank you, Belinda. So does anyone else have any questions that they'd like to aim at Chris and Teagan? Or any problems that they've experienced that they'd like a little bit more advice on? You can raise a hand or you can just shout up. This is where everyone's working out where the hand button is or where the chat is. So you can either press a hand or you can just come off mute and shout up for us.
Everyone's just trying to digest all the information, hopefully.
It's a good sign though. We usually get an influx of questions or people sitting there and thinking, what's going on?
Give us a minute to think. We've got, all right, well, while you're having a minute to think, I suppose one thing I've just realised we should have touched on, perhaps it's not related to COVID, but it's happened during a similar time period, is a sea change in ESG and social value being dealt with in bids as being a sort of tacked on piece to being absolutely integral. And that reflects what's happening with a lot of organizations. So, ESG reporting, ESG commitments, climate emergency, social objectives of our public sector clients, that's gaining a lot of importance. So in the same way as you can get a mismatch between the technical solution and the commercials, there's a potential to get a mismatch where the sort of the ESG, the environmental, social and governance doesn't permeate all aspects of the bid, and that's probably a missed opportunity. We know of some bidders in the housing sector who have realized they're underweight when it comes to talking about environmental considerations of how they deliver housing, and they've realized they've lost bids as a result. So there's a real tangible business case for getting your sort of environmental, your net zero credentials and commitments and supply chain, up to speed. So I just didn't want to finish without mentioning that and making sure that was conveyed.
And I think that's important too, because I was talking to a colleague of ours and he was mentioning we're doing a very similar procurement to one that we did sort of 12 months ago or 12, 18 months ago. So very similar types of clients, very similar types of procurement. And he had mentioned that even though it was something that you looked at a bit, it wasn't sort of a specific question and it wasn't sort of specific in the evaluation, but it was obviously a nice to have and people may have scored slightly higher. But in this procurement that we're doing at the moment, it's actually a dedicated question, a sort of what's your sustainability sort of approach? How are you going to approach it on this development? So from going from a sort of nice to have if someone mentioned it, it's now a sort of standalone question that's going to be standalone marked in this thing. So that just shows the movement over the past sort of 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, I love that. And it's a good movement as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Nicholas has had a thought, had a think, and we've got a question.
Gave him a minute.
Sure. So one thing I'd love to understand from a sort of the client perspective is the difference between writing in the first person personal and the third person kind of much more distant kind of informal aspect. A lot of the stakeholders I work with in both my business currently and previous businesses have kind of a hesitation to write in that kind of first person, more personal aspect. I read a lot of things that talks about content writing, saying you should be making it more first person. Be interested in getting your views from a client perspective, both just for the kind of conversational aspect of it, but also to have the little bit of backing externally to go, other experts in my industry agree. So yeah, over to you guys. If you have any thoughts or views on, presumably it's going to be, there's a time and place for it, but what would you recommend in the most instances, and how do you get your stakeholder backing to take this kind of leap, whereas some of them may be more familiar, more comfortable with a historical way of bidding into public sector?
Chris, I don't know whether you've got a view.
Yeah, go on, you go first.
I don't think it hurts, is my personal view. And I think that's because it goes back to that partnership thing. I don't think it hurts to sort of have a personal edge to it, because I think people like to know who they're dealing with. And I think putting it in a sort of personal tone as opposed to a corporate does sort of, it reflects that partnership. I don't know, it's a bit more personal and it's a bit more, I've certainly on one, because we didn't work public side, but we worked private side. And actually one of the feedback that we got throughout the whole thing was that they really liked the person that they were dealing with. And if anything, that was their biggest positive point. So I don't think it hurts to sort of put that positive, like personal lens on it. Chris, I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, I mean, to give the KPMG view, I know we had a program and we continue with the sort of the learnings from it around winning language, and that sort of, writing as you would speak, not over, we used to have the slogan for KPMG was cutting through complexity. So we didn't want to then chuck in a load of, jargon and so on. So yes, absolutely focus on that. My personal view, if I was evaluating something, is that, I don't like to see, the passive voice and all that sort of, it will be done sort of thing, rather than we will do this. I much prefer the direct. But for what it's worth, and it's only a personal view, I prefer we will to we would. We will do this, we will do that, not we would or we could or we might, we will. So yeah, I could totally back you up on that crusade, on that mission to get that sort of approach, definitely. Yeah,
So around-
and you know, and maybe the final bit of advice, I guess, is all clients that, you know, no two clients are the same. So take a guide from the way the client has written their own specification and try to map the language and tone to that.
I'm just curious whether anybody on the call's ever had any negative implications of going with the kind of more first person approach. I think it would be more telling if nobody ever has, because then it leans even more in the direction of you should be doing that. But just curious if anybody has had that negative experience from it. Negative implications.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because there's one thing that is a pitfall potentially, is you've got to have credentialized, or potentially you've got to have shown that you're of a certain size and a certain scale. And there's this we grapple with it sometimes as KPMG, because we're quite large as an organization. How far do you talk about the immediate team who'll be dealing with the work? How far do you convey that you've got a load of other people you can speak to without it being meaningless? And sometimes if you have a combination of the very personal language with without properly credentializing that you're going to bring in whatever resource you're going to bring in, people can confuse, you know, the bidder for being small or under-resourced or light in some way. So there's a bit of a balance there. But yeah, Philip, you've got a comment.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's just to say that I much prefer writing in the first person. You feel that you're talking to the buyer feels that you're talking to them. Generally speaking, we start off with the name of the client that we're writing for, because we're bid consultants rather than bidding in our own right. And then we refer to ourselves as we going forwards from there. I've never had any issues with evaluators or buyers. The issues and pushback seems to come from clients who feel the need to be more corporate speak in the way that they're addressing their documents.
That's right. I'm trying to remember, even in defence, whether we've had an issue in defence at any point with being cautioned on language. I think it may have come up. I think we may have specific sort of defence-specific style guides when we're dealing with defence, but it still allows the normal, you know, it still allows we. It doesn't all have to be in the passive voice, but it might just have slightly more, you know, of a structured style to it.
Yeah, I think that's great. We've got another question from Sarah. And Sarah has asked, what do you think makes a good CV from the client perspective? What clearly demonstrates that they're the right team to work with? And that's a great question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Over to you, Sarah.
Well, I think this goes back, it's a similar point that we had mentioned previously, which is the sort of always link it back to the why and link it back to a why for the client. So I think it's sort of linking that whole thing through. It's, well, what is that person doing? Why have you put them there? What makes them the right person? And how is that going to add value to the client? Ultimately is what your CV needs to do. So I think it needs to be someone, you need to clearly say what the role that they're going to be doing, why they're doing that role. So what's their experience? What are they going to be bringing to that role? And why does all that experience sort of differentiate them from others and add value to the client? So it might be, well, actually, they've worked on a similar thing just up the road and can sort of bring X, Y, Z to you. And here's some specific things that they've dealt with previously that straight away is lessons learned and they can translate into value to you. Whatever it might be, that's sort of how, well, it's certainly how we structure our CVs, and how I think if I'm reading a CV, that's what sort of resonates the highest with me, because I go, right, okay, yeah, you've sold me.
Yeah, we try to tailoring for the subject matter of the bid. So if it's a university bid, you know, and you've gone in with all the health projects that the guys worked on, you know, it hasn't had sufficient tailoring. And the ideal being, I suppose, if you're free on the structure, that you can show some of the elements of scope that the person ticks off. So, you know, this person has the following bits of experience that the client has said they were looking for. And then I suppose the ultimate is if you're able to tie together the credentials that you put in, the case studies that you put in, have those case studies also feature on the CVs, and have some evidence of some of the people having worked together previously. So if you can take away from 3 CVs that 2 of those people have worked together on 2 projects and the other 2 have worked together on 2 projects, and they've all worked together on 1, then that gives a whole, you know, consistency to it all.
Yeah.
Yeah, it ties it all in together, I guess.
Yeah.
It kind of picks up what you're trying to say as a bidder.
Yeah.
So Nicholas has got another question. So his question is, I'm going to read this out off the cuff. What makes an executive summary a winning one? Many of my stakeholders have strong views around these. For example, I advise to start with a hook, detail the goals, challenges, solutions, benefits, and have a close with next steps. I think that's a great start, but I'm not a bidder. Many stakeholders rather prefer to spend half a page telling the client about their own organisation, but there is no set rules to them. So I'm interested in the subjective view of what makes a great one.
Sorry, if I can add to that quickly, it may not be clear. When I say they'll spend half a page telling the client about their own organization, I don't mean if I was, say, XYZ Limited, not telling you about my organization, but almost stating what the client side organization does. I see a lot of stakeholders start by going with that, they'll be like, ABC Limited is a leading organization, they've done this, and it's like, my view on it is probably the most boring thing I can possibly read if I work for an organization is half a page about my organization. I know that, I work there. But some stakeholders seem very set in their ways of starting out that way. So I'm just kind of interested in, from a group perspective, especially from a client perspective, having observed them in the past, what have made those standout ones be truly great?
It's an interesting challenge because actually some clients, particularly in the sort of, we get questions we have questions in a lot of the development partnership bids that are along the lines of, please illustrate your understanding of our requirements or something like that. And then you do get dragged into, practically you're going to get good marks if you just say back to them exactly what they've said to you, with a bit of evidence. So that leaving that aside, I personally like I worked with someone who was a very senior former civil servant, had been permanent secretary in Department of Transport, and were then on a sort of non-exec role. And they had a particular idea for executive summaries, which I have shamelessly borrowed since, which was to structure them so that every headline can be read. And if you put all the headlines together of the executive summary, so all the top level headings, you'd actually be able to read a coherent sentence or coherent paragraph, which described all your key messages that you were trying to get across in the document. And so instead of having, sort of introduction, operations, or whatever it may be, it was literally a series of statements which were all, sentences in their own rights. And then the descriptive stuff was just putting flesh on the bone of that. And I find that quite nice. And I suppose, I don't know, Nicholas, is that something you've seen, or is it similar to the way you would approach the sort of hook, goals, challenges?
It's interesting. It's that's pretty much an approach that one of my old bid directors used to advocate for, and it has a lot of merit as well.
Maybe it's possibly quite old school. I don't know, but it's
like I said, I normally try and create like a logical argument, effectively, so that kind of introductory piece to hook the audience. Clearly understand the goals, and then obviously the challenges stem from that, because the challenges are what are holding you back from achieving those goals today or tomorrow. And then, okay, so you have these challenges that need a resolution. That's where our solution piece comes in. And then obviously you go in the final section, maybe a commercial overview, and then some sort of closing in the sense of next steps to get you towards that, or we want to have a meeting in the next 2 weeks, that sort of thing.
I think that will go down great with our clients. So, in the you've got limited space, haven't you? You've got time. What I find now is you rarely get an executive summary. It's quite often that you don't get the opportunity now, do you? With electronic bids, to get that across in the same way. Interesting.
So what I was trying to get to is just the approach that I advocate for. And this, like I said, this is very subjective. There is no right and wrong to this. But that's why I was interested in just group views. But try and create like a logical argument. And I think normally an argument starts with what you're trying to get to, what's holding it back, and what you're going to do about it. Like at its highest level, that seems to make sense. But it's just, I thought it's interesting because I do get challenged on that quite often.
Yeah, I think it's a balance. I think it's what Chris said before, that it's a balance between sort of demonstrating that you understand the client and what they want. And I think some people feel that the only way to do that is perhaps through a paragraph of playing back, I know you and I know what you want. I think there's other ways to do it, but it's a way. I don't know. My personal view with an executive summary, if I read it, is sort of an elevator pitch expanded. So similar to what Chris said, each sort of start of a paragraph, if you were to snip it out, should be your elevator pitch. And then what you're doing really is sort of adding a bit of meat onto that. But yeah, if you were to pull out the key headlines, that if I was in an LD and saying, why should I pick you? Like, now's your time to tell me. Yeah, that's my view.
Thank you all. I'll give Ian a chance. He's got a question over there.
And we've got a question off of Ian H. So as a client, do you quickly flick through the pages of the bid before getting into reading it page to page? And if so, what are your tips to create a great first impression? This is a great question as well.
Good, isn't it? Yeah. So for me, it's all about signposting. So, it's all about, do I get the impression of consistency, polish, for want of a better word, clarity and signposting. So I immediately know, even if I haven't got into the detail yet, I know what's in there and I know where it is and I can clearly see what's covered. I think that would be the big one for me. And that extends to with electronic submissions, file naming convention, getting a consistent, a clear and a logical way of naming the files goes a long way as well. Back in the old days with working with Hobs on paper bids, it's all about quality and consistency and polish around the sort of the way that they were presented in folders and with proper section dividers and tables of contents and stuff. And to the extent we can extend that into electronic bids, I think that benefits people.
Yeah, I wouldn't really add anything more to that. I think human nature is to flick. I don't think anyone sort of sits down. Yeah, even when you've got a good book, you sort of flick through and just be like, how many pages have I got to read? It's just human nature. So I think everyone will do a good flick. How much weight that adds, I wouldn't say huge amounts. But yeah, if you flick through a bit and go, oh yeah, okay, that's easily signposted. I can see where that section is. Oh, okay, yep. Oh yeah, that seems easy to read. Then great. But yeah, it's.
Would you still do that? And forgive me, so would you still do that if that was an electronic bid submission, or let's say a client, it was an interactive PDF? So would you guys still have a cheeky look through and think, well, that's cool, and click through?
Yeah, I do a scroll of the mouse through. The virtual flick through is what I would do, just a quick scroll to be like, oh, how many pages, because you see it is 100 pages, but how much of that's pictures, how much of it's heavy text. So you'll always do a quick sort of flick just to be like, how long do I need to actually sit down to read this? So I think you'll always sort of flick through it.
Yeah, I think that's because it's one of them things, isn't it? It's like picking up, like you said, a book. When you look at it and you flick through, I read really old people books now, novels, romantic books, not so much bidding. But like you flick through and it's seeing that same text, I'm guessing. It's making sure that you've got your headers, your footers, you've got a page count on there. If your graphs are right, are they correctly designed? Are they easy to read? Infographics is another one, I guess. It's another way of communicating, isn't it? And just polishing, even though it's online, just making it look even more appealing from that. So graphic design plays a big part as well, doesn't it?
And if you do get, and when you are in the sort of the face-to-face meeting afterwards, a placemat style, people come with different things, don't they? Some people don't bring any paper material now. Some people bring a placemat, just a single page with lots of good information on it, which kind of strikes the balance between wanting to leave them with something versus not wanting to create paper for the sake of it. So it's probably a good halfway house now.
I think that's worthwhile. So off the back of Ian's question, having that first impression, and we've spoken about consistency within the bid itself, the bid document, and how you answer and the way that you word things. But I'm guessing your consistency doesn't just stop at your bid submission and having it looking a great looking document or a PDF or something like that, but you've got to follow it through. And like Chris just said, you forget about the end, the presentation and the pitch, the real life face to face. So is that a consideration that you'd make at bid stage again to keep that consistency all the way through?
Yeah, definitely.
It's your win themes, right? They're the things that shouldn't change. There might be little bits and bobs that change, but ultimately your win themes, your key messages should stay the same, and they should be crystal clear. If I read the executive summary, if I read the document front to back, they should be screaming out everywhere that they're the 5-6 reasons, whatever it might be, of why you're the right person to be choosing. And if someone's coming into the presentation again, they should be solid, and they can evolve and shift slightly, but they should really stay the same because they're the sort of reasons why you're the right person. The rest is just sort of detail that sits around it.
Yeah. And I think it's about that you've got to be confident in who you are as a business or a team and pass that all the way through, even to presentation side of things. Guys, I thought that this was amazing, by the way. And I don't want to wind anyone up, but this has actually been probably the most easy flowing, even with everyone that's attended, getting involved and asking questions. It's been a breath of fresh air. It's been so lovely. And Melinda's been a lovely session. So on that note, thank you so much for joining us and taking the time out of your day, Teagan and Chris, for letting us pick your brains and ask you random questions totally off the bat. So we really appreciate
it. You're welcome, Raquel, and look forward to joining the next one with my feet up next time. Just listen.
And of course, if anyone has any questions, like I think we've both been linked on the LinkedIn thing, so feel free to reach out. I'm happy to take anything else offline.
Yeah,
by all means. Guys, thank you so much for joining us today. For those of you that aren't on our Use These Better page on LinkedIn, it's in the comments section, right at the bottom, the little speech bubble. There is a link that Dave has just dropped in for us. Get on that and you can find our recordings on our YouTube channel as well. But again, thank you so much and thanks for joining us. Have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
See you later.
Thanks very much.